My hands went still on the carving knife when my son Thomas looked up from across the Christmas table and said, "Dad, Nicole's been putting the $4,500 into your account every month, right? You've been comfortable?" I set the knife down on the edge of the platter. Outside, snow was coming down soft and steady over the backyard in Oakville, the kind of snow my late wife Margaret used to call the good kind, the kind that muffled everything. I looked at my son's face open, expectant, proud of himself for being the kind of man who takes care of his father, and I felt something shift in my chest that I can only describe as the floor dropping out from under a house you thought was solid. "The church potluck's been keeping me fed," I said, and I laughed a little, because I didn't know what else to do. Thomas laughed too, thinking I was joking. Nicole, sitting at the far end of the table, did not laugh. She reached for her wine glass, and her fingers, I noticed, were perfectly steady. That was the moment everything began to unravel, though I wouldn't understand it fully for another 3 weeks. My name is Gordon Whitfield. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant outside Hamilton before I retired at 63 with a modest pension, my CPP payments, and the house in Oakville that Margaret and I had paid off together. When Margaret died of a stroke 4 years ago, Thomas offered to sell the house and move me into a condo closer to him and Nicole in Burlington. I told him no. This house was where we'd raised him, where Margaret's roses still came back every June without being asked. I wasn't leaving. Thomas understood. He's a good man, my son. He built his construction and project management company from nothing. Started with a pickup truck and a contractor's license at 24, and by the time he was 40, he had 40 employees and contracts across the Golden Horseshoe. He married Nicole 11 years ago. She was sharp, organized, had a background in bookkeeping. I'll be honest, when they first got together, I thought she was exactly what Thomas needed. Someone who understood numbers. Someone who wouldn't let things slip. I was not wrong about her understanding numbers. After Margaret died, Thomas sat me down and told me he wanted to put $4,500 a month into my account. "Dad, I make more money than Nicole and I know what to do with," he said. "This isn't charity. You built the foundation I stand on. Let me do this." I argued with him for 20 minutes. He won. We agreed Nicole would handle the transfers because Thomas, for all his business sense, hated administrative tasks. Nicole set up a standing transfer from their joint account every 15th of the month, $4,500 Canadian, directly into my checking account at TD. Except it never arrived. Not once in 22 months. I didn't know that for a long time. That's the part I'm still ashamed of how long I didn't know. After Margaret died, I lost some of my sharpness about money. I paid my bills. I watched my balance. When it was lower than I expected, I told myself I'd overspent on groceries, or that my property tax had come out, or that I was simply getting old and losing track. My pension from the plant was $2,100 a month. My CPP was $980. I had my TFSA that I barely touched. I was not destitute. I was not starving. But I was, without realizing it, living on exactly what I earned myself, nothing more, while somewhere, every 15th of the month, $4,500 was going somewhere it was not supposed to go. Thomas never asked about the money directly until that Christmas dinner. He assumed his father was taken care of. Nicole assured him I was. If Thomas ever said, "I'll call Dad to check in," Nicole would say, "I just spoke to him yesterday. He's wonderful. He says thank you for the gift." She managed the information between us as smoothly as she managed everything else. What cracked it open was not brilliance on my part. It was a Tuesday afternoon in January, 3 weeks after Christmas, when I was at my TD branch on Trafalgar Road to set up an automatic bill payment for my hydro. The branch manager, a woman named Carol Fenton, who had processed my mortgage renewal back in 2009 and still remembered my wife's name, glanced at my account history while she was helping me. She didn't say anything at first. She helped me set up the payment. Then, as I was putting on my coat, she said, quietly, "Gordon, I hope you don't mind me saying I've noticed your account activity over the past couple of years. Are you doing all right? Has anything changed with your income?" I told her my son had been sending me money monthly for almost 2 years. She turned her monitor slightly so I could see it without her having to say anything further. 22 months of statements. The $4,500 transfer did not appear once. I sat back down. Carol closed her office door. She pulled up every statement going back to the month Thomas and I had made our arrangement, and we went through them together, line by line, the way you go through a will after someone dies, with that particular quality of attention that comes from knowing you are looking at something that cannot be undone. Nothing, Not a single transfer from Thomas and Nicole's joint account to mine. Not in November, not in December, not on any 15th of any month. Is it possible it was going to a different account? Carol asked carefully. I told her I didn't have another account. Would you like me to note this conversation? She asked. I understood what she was offering. Documentation. A record. I said yes. I drove home in the January gray, parked in my driveway, and sat in the car for a long time watching the snow on Margaret's rose beds. The roses were buried under it, sleeping, waiting. I thought about Thomas at that Christmas table, so easy and confident, asking about the money the way you ask about something you've long since stopped worrying about. He had no idea. I was certain of that. My son is not a complicated liar. He never has been. Whatever was happening, it wasn't coming from him. I did not call Thomas that night. I needed to understand what I was looking at before I handed it to him, because I loved my son, and I knew that what I was about to show him would change his marriage, his sense of safety, and possibly his understanding of the last 2 years of his life. That's not a phone call. That's a conversation you prepare for. I spent the next 4 days being methodical. I have an old engineer's instinct for documentation. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen, and I applied it now. I printed my account statements. I made a list of every date the transfer should have arrived, with the amount, and the actual balance on those dates. I called a woman named Patricia Drummond, a family lawyer in Burlington whom Thomas had used for a contract dispute 2 years earlier. He'd spoken highly of her. I told her I needed a consultation about a private financial matter involving a family member. Patricia met me on a Thursday morning in her office on Brant Street. She had that particular quality of stillness that good lawyers develop, where they listen to everything before they respond to anything. I laid out my documents. I explained the arrangement. I explained what Carol at TD had found. Before we talk about next steps, Patricia said, I want to ask you something. Do you know where $4,500 a month for 22 months goes? That's $99,000. I told her I didn't know yet. We need to know, she said, because the picture looks different depending on the answer. She recommended I speak to a forensic accountant she worked with named David Park. Not a confrontation yet, she said. Information first. You need to know exactly what you're dealing with before you show this to your son. I called David Park that afternoon. He was matter-of-fact and unhurried, the kind of man who has seen enough financial wrongdoing that very little surprises him. I sent him the documentation Carol had printed for me, along with the records I had at home. He called me back in 48 hours. The transfers were made, he told me, every 15th of the month. $99,000 over 22 months, exactly as your son arranged. He paused. They were made to a TD account, just not yours. He explained it to me carefully. Somewhere in the early months of the arrangement, a second TD checking account had been opened. The account number differed from mine by 2 digits. The name on the account was G. Whitfield, not Gordon Whitfield, just G. Whitfield. The $4,500 transfers from Thomas and Nicole's joint account went directly into that account every 15th of the month, on schedule, without fail. David told me that tracing who controlled that account required the bank's cooperation and, likely, a formal complaint. But he said something else that stayed with me. In his experience, accounts like this opened in a slight variation of a family member's name, designed to catch automatic transfers, were not set up by accident. They required documentation, in-person verification, and a deliberate mismatch between names and account holders. I sat with that information for 1 full day before I did anything with it. I thought about Nicole at the Christmas table, her steady hand on the wine glass. I thought about every time over the past 2 years that Thomas had mentioned the money and Nicole had smoothly redirected the conversation. I thought about the Christmas 2 years ago when she'd offered to drive me to my doctor's appointment and I'd said no thank you, I was fine, and she'd seemed, for just a fraction of a second, disappointed. I thought about the time she'd asked me, very casually, whether I'd updated my will since Margaret died. I'd said yes. I'd updated it 6 months after Margaret passed, leaving everything to Thomas. Nicole had nodded and said that was sensible. I was 68 years old and someone had been stealing from me for nearly 2 years. I called Patricia Drummond and told her I was ready to move forward. Patricia filed a formal complaint with TD on my behalf. Within a week, TD's fraud investigation unit had confirmed that the secondary account had been opened 18 months before the transfers began, long before Thomas and I had even made our arrangement. The account had been opened with a copy of my identification. TD could not tell me how that identification had been obtained, but they confirmed that all $99,000 had been transferred out of that account in regular withdrawals over the 22 months, largely in amounts under $9,999, which Patricia said was a pattern consistent with deliberate structuring to avoid automatic reporting thresholds. The money had moved, in portions, into two accounts, a personal savings account and an account at a different financial institution, both in Nicole's name. I called my son on a Saturday morning in February. I asked him to come over alone. I told him it was important and that I was fine. I wasn't sick, but that I needed to show him something in person. He heard something in my voice and arrived within the hour. I had everything laid out on my kitchen table, the TD statements, the documents from David Park, the printed summary Patricia had prepared, clean and organized, the way you present findings after 30 years in engineering. Thomas sat down, and I poured us both coffee, and I let him read. I watched my son's face as he went through the pages. He is not a man who cries easily. He learned that from me, honestly. But there was a moment, somewhere in the middle of David Park's summary, when his jaw tightened in a way I hadn't seen since he was 19 and found out a business partner had cheated him on a labor. Quote, he put the pages down flat on the table, and he looked at me and he said, "Dad, how long have you known?" 3 weeks, I said. "Why didn't you call me the night you found out?" "Because I needed to know what I was handing you," I said. "I needed it to be solid. I needed you to be able to see it clearly." He looked at the papers again. $99,000. Yes. She told me every month that she'd made the transfer. I know. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a cardinal landed on the feeder I keep by the kitchen window, the same feeder Margaret bought at a craft fair in Elora years ago, bright red against the snow. Neither of us said anything until it flew away. "I need to talk to Patricia," Thomas finally said. "She's expecting your call," I told him. What happened next I will summarize because the legal details are not the heart of this story, though they matter. Thomas confronted Nicole that evening. She denied it initially, then admitted to borrowing the money with the intention to repay it, a claim that Patricia said was legally meaningless given the method of transfer and the structuring pattern. Nicole had, as David Park eventually confirmed, used the funds to cover significant personal debt spending that predated her marriage to Thomas, and that she had kept entirely hidden from him, including a failed private investment that had cost her over $60,000 years before they met. She had married Thomas while carrying that debt, and when Thomas set up the transfers to me, she had seen an opportunity. Thomas filed for separation in March. Nicole did not contest the forensic accounting findings. TD cooperated with the investigation and agreed to a partial recovery from the fraudulent account. In the end, between the bank's restitution process and the settlement in the separation proceedings, $81,000 of the $99,000 was recovered. $18,000 was gone into the parts of Nicole's debt that couldn't be traced back. I won't pretend the $18,000 doesn't sting. It does. But it's not the number that kept me awake those first weeks. What kept me awake was simpler and harder than money. I am a man who spent 31 years making sure machines worked the way they were supposed to. I raised a son by myself after Margaret's first health scare, when Thomas was 14 and I was running the household and managing her recovery and showing up to work every morning because we needed the income. I have never in my life considered myself naive, and yet I had sat in this house for 22 months, month after month, watching my checking account and telling myself I was simply getting old and losing track, while $4,500 slipped sideways into someone else's pocket. The shame of that, the specific shame of a capable person who did not notice, is something I don't think fully leaves you. Thomas came over every Sunday through February and March. We didn't always talk about Nicole or the money. Mostly we ate whatever I made, and sometimes he helped me clear the back walkway. And once we drove out to Bronte Creek Provincial Park and walked the trail Margaret used to love along the 12-mile creek where the trees come all the way down to the water. He told me on that walk that he was angry at himself for not calling me directly every month to confirm the transfer had arrived. I told him that was not his fault. He'd trusted his wife. There's nothing wrong with that. The failure was hers, not his. "You should have told me you were struggling," he said. "I didn't know I was struggling," I said. "That was the design." He thought about that. "She chose you on purpose," he said slowly, "because you'd be too proud to ask." I'd thought about that too, in the months since Carol had turned her monitor toward me in that quiet TD office. Nicole had known me for 11 years. She knew I would not call Thomas and say, "Son, the money hasn't arrived." She knew I would find a way to make do and tell myself it was fine. She had built her scheme on my character as much as on my account number. That's the part that stayed with me longest, not the amount. Not even the betrayal. The fact that someone had studied me carefully enough to know exactly where my blind spot was and had aimed directly at it. In April, I received a letter from the Ontario government's Office for Seniors Affairs in response to a report Patricia had filed as part of the legal process. Financial elder abuse is a category of exploitation that triggers automatic referral in Ontario when it meets certain thresholds, and ours met several. A coordinator reached out to ask if I'd be willing to share my experience, anonymized, as part of a resource they were developing for families on financial arrangements between adult children and aging parents. Not a campaign, not a speech, just a description of what had happened and what had made it difficult to detect. I said yes. I described what I know now, that the most effective financial abuse of an older person rarely looks like theft. It looks like help. It comes wrapped in the language of care. I'll handle the transfers, Dad. I'll manage the paperwork. Just let me take care of it. It counts on the older person's reluctance to burden their children with questions. It counts on trust earned over years. And it counts, more than anything, on the assumption that the people helping you love you. Most of them do. That's what makes this hard to say plainly. Most of the people who help aging parents with finances are doing it with love and without any wrongdoing. But the ones who aren't the ones who see in that trust an opportunity, they are harder to see coming precisely because they look identical to everyone else. What I'd tell any parent now is this. If someone else is handling your finances, even someone you love completely, you should still see the statements. You should still know the numbers. Not because love isn't real, but because love and verification are not opposites. They never were. The bank doesn't care how much someone loves you. The account doesn't lie. Thomas and I had dinner last week. He's doing well, all things considered. The company is steady. He's been seeing a counselor, which he would never have agreed to 5 years ago, and which I'm quietly grateful for. He brought a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir that we drank with the pot roast I made, and after dinner we sat in the living room with the lights low and didn't say much. Just two men who have known each other for 45 years, sitting with what had happened and what was still standing after it. Before he left, he hugged me at the door the way he used to when he was small, longer than necessary, tighter than the moment strictly required. "You all right, Dad?" he asked. "I'm all right," I said, and I meant it. The roses came back in June, just like always. Margaret would have said they were showing off. I told them she was right, and I poured myself a coffee on the back step and sat watching them for a long time in the early morning quiet, and I thought about how much can be taken from a person and how much, still, remains. I'm sharing this because I spent 2 years not knowing something I should have known. I'm sharing it because I don't think I was unusual, or unusually careless, or unusually old. I think what happened to me happens in houses very much like mine, to people very much like me. And it keeps happening partly because the people it happens to are too ashamed to say it out loud. I'm 68 years old. I'm a retired mechanical engineer. I was married for 37 years to the best person I ever knew. I raised a good son. I own my house. I tend my garden. And I sat for 22 months not knowing that $99,000 had been quietly lifted out of my life, one transfer at a time. I'm saying it out loud. If any of this sounds familiar, if you're the one receiving help, or if you're the one providing it, please check the statements. Have the conversation. Ask the question directly, even if it feels uncomfortable, especially if it feels uncomfortable. Carol Fenton asked me a question in a TD branch on a Tuesday afternoon, and it changed everything that came after. It took her 30 seconds of professional courage to say something she could easily have left unsaid. I think about that often. How close I came to sitting in this house for another 2 years, watching my balance, telling myself I was losing track. Don't wait for a stranger's kindness to tell you what your own statements already know. Subscribe if this reached you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And whatever you're carrying right now, I hope you find the courage to look at it clearly. Not because it will be easy, but because you deserve to know the truth about your own life. Take care of yourselves out there, and take care of each other.